for December. So the topic of this month is irrigation or irritation, mainly because the weather we've been having over the last few weeks really makes things difficult to fit things in, and irrigation kind of falls to the bottom of that list because it's one thing that we have to try and fit in around spraying, getting on the paddock, and so it's a bit annoying when we have to go turn the irrigator on, especially with the rain that we've been having as well. So the outline of the webinar today will be having a look at what we need to do heading into peak irrigation season. While it's been a cool spring, it will start to ramp up sooner than you think. Touch on how to fit in irrigation around the weather that we've been having. I also want to touch on and spend a bit of time on the impacts of wet ground prep. Now, I know most of the ground prep has happened, or it's happening at the moment in spuds, but it's been really tricky in between those intermittent rainfall events, especially those larger rainfall events around that 20 to 30 mils. Now, while we have our crop in the ground, there are flow-on effects that can come from it, and we're seeing that across a lot of our sites. And then we'll follow it up with the seasonal outlook of the dryland probes from our weather stations and the farming forecast of dryland probes around the state and see how things are tracking. So I want to start off the first one with looking into heading into our peak irrigation season, and this one's been driven around by a question that's come in. Now, if anyone has any specific questions, there are opportunities to put that in on your registration form. So I encourage you to put questions in, because the way I structure these webinars are based on what I'm seeing out and about, the issues that I'm talking to our clients with, what the moisture probes are telling me in a variety of soils and crops. So one of the questions which I thought was really pertinent was, so what is effective rainfall? Do we balance out ETO with rainfall estimate and be happy with that? Or what other considerations do we need to take into account? Now, I did touch on ETO and ETC a couple of webinars ago, but I want to go over this again because we're coming into this and to address this particular question. So this is the Swan Systems email that gets sent out when you subscribe to it. It's a free one you can get. And it is a great little email to just give you a bit of an indication about how we're looking in terms of our evaporative transpiration for the following week and the estimated rain that we're going to get for the week as well. So this is one thing that you can quickly look at, have a look, and by using our ETO, we can pretty much go based on our ETO forecast of 32 millimetres and our estimated rain of about 7 millimetres. We're going to have to irrigate put on about 25 mils of irrigation to keep up with our crop. Now, they have to bear in mind that that is a crop factor of 1, and I'll go into that a bit in a moment. So if you use this as a bit of a guide, it's a fantastic starting point, but there are a lot of other things we need to consider. So if you want to build a rule of thumb, this is something to go to, but if you really want to focus in on getting maximum irrigation efficiency, I'll go into the bit now. So this is theoretically, this is how we kind of understand our soil water storage, or understand our plain available water. So essentially this equation is rainfall plus irrigation equals minus runoff, drainage, evaporation and transpiration equals our soil moisture. Now, that's all well and good in theory and in a paper or a thesis, but there are so many things we need to consider or take into consideration when we look at this. So the first thing is precipitation, so our rainfall. Understanding what it's worth to you is so important, okay? It's not just a matter of seeing what's sitting in your rain gauge and going, well, that's my number. There are a lot of considerations we need to look at. Same with irrigation, all right? Check your irrigator. It's funny how when things are starting up, and we're doing a lot of pivot uniformity tests at the moment, seeing how what it says on the screen, what it's putting on, is not actually what the pivot's putting on. So first point of call is to, before you start irrigation season, do your irrigator checks, clean out your nozzles, make sure they're doing what they're doing. Book in with Chelsea or your pivot uniformity test if that's something you want to look at, or if you've had bought anything upgraded on the system, make sure that it's actually doing what it says it's doing, because you can be seeing it running and going everything's great, but it might not actually be doing what it says it's doing. So we really seem to overestimate our rainfall and underestimate our irrigation. It's almost like when we're dieting, we overestimate the amount of calories we burn when we're exercising, and we underestimate the amount of calories that are sitting in that burger, fries, and chips, and drink when we're sitting at Macca's. It's similar to in terms of this formula here. We overestimate how much our rainfall is worth to us, and we overestimate how much our irrigation is, because we really don't take into consideration or measure these parts of the equation here. So we talked about runoff. So runoff is a massive one, particularly some of those large rainfall events we had in November. If you've got, I was driving through and there was paddock where I had probes in, and I was driving past the paddock in the middle of the rain, and the drains were water was flowing down the drains. Now, two things there. Number one, your drains are working, they're doing their job, fantastic. Number two, that's telling me that not all the rainfall is going into the soil where the roots are, where the plant needs it. So already there you can say, well, I know that I just tipped out 30 mils out of my rain gauge, but I know that's not 30 mils that are available to my plants. All right. So going for a walk in the rain, seeing what's actually going on, seeing what's going in, seeing what's running off is really important. It's really hard. It's impossible to measure runoff, actually quantify what you're losing. But if you know it's happening, then that's something that you need to be looking at. Same with the irrigator. Have a look, take your irrigator for a walk, making sure that you're not getting any runoff. Because if you're getting runoff, then as soon as you're getting runoff, any other water that's being applied is being lost to runoff. You're not going to get that into the profile. Water wants to follow take the easiest form of preferential flow. And as soon as you're flowing off the top, that's number one. Drainage, really hard to measure. And it's one where we can kind of pick it up with moisture probes. We can pick it up when the soil's a bit dry and you can see it going past the root zone. But you know, it's one that is really hard to quantify. But over irrigating is usually we'll see that on the surface before we start losing it to deep drainage. Evaporation, sorry. So that's what we're losing through wind, sun, and all those kind of things. One thing I want to mention on that one is if we see water pooling on the surface or ponding because we have poor infiltration, you will lose water through evaporation a lot quicker. And you also lose evaporation on windier days if you're irrigating on windier days or hotter days. So actually understanding if you're putting on, say, 10 mil irrigation and it's a really hot, windy day, maybe factor that down to 7 mils or 6 mils because you're losing some before it's actually onto the ground, or it's being sits on the leaves and it gets lost evaporation there. And then the last one there is transpiration. So really important there to know your crop factor. So knowing your crop factor is really what's going to drive your transpiration rate there. So ETO and ETC, I spoke about this a couple of workshops ago, but I'll mention this again because it is a really important concept to know for those who didn't jump into this September webinar. So ETO is a standardized measurement of atmospheric water demand, and it's got a crop factor of 1. So a crop factor of 1 will be your spuds coming up to growth closure, or your peas coming up to maturity. But what it is defined by about 12 centimeters of actively growing pasture. That's what your crop factor of 1 is. Now that takes into account solar radiation, humidity, air temperature, and wind speed. They're what kind of drive that water being taken up by the crop at a faster rate. ETC is the actual water loss from the crop. So your ETC will increase as your crop increases. So this diagram just gives you a bit of indication here. So early on, you've got a low crop coefficient. It is your leaf area index, so number of stomata when they're open. That's where you lose a lot of your soil moisture through the plant. As that increases, your crop factor increases, and as it senesces or dies off, you see that you get that slight decrease there. But understanding, so if you're irrigating a crop here to a crop factor of 1, you're going to be supplying too much water to the plant. So this is a bit of an understanding is important. And I did mention that you can see this, you can find this at rough figures there for FAO.org. So looking at the crop factors and crop coefficients, they give you tables there that give you a bit of indication. So if we look at potatoes, for example, you can see here, this is the crop coefficient curve for the potatoes. Days after planting, you see it's variety dependent, but you're getting around that 1.1, 1.2. So then you get your, say if we went back to that Swan Systems table, you'd see your crop factor of this your ETO, and then you multiply that by 0.25, and that would indicate that would take into take out the consideration there. And if you look into something like peas, so a lot of people got peas in at the moment. You can see here at their early season, they're at that 0.5. At maturity, they're at full canopy, you're at 1.1, 1.15. But I put the dry and the dry and the fresh there because thing with peas here is you've still got a high coefficient because you're harvesting it green, whereas potato you're senescing, so that's where it's dropping off. So that's an important thing to understand. So back to that question: what is effective rainfall? Do we balance out ETO with the rainfall estimate and be happy with that, or there are other considerations? So the answer is using that formula, that simple formula of ETO minus rain is what I need to supplement with irrigation. It's a great guide, but do your best and understand all the factors involved to determine your water balance. It won't give you an absolute measurement, but what it does is go, okay, I'm now, instead of doing 3 irrigations this week that will increase that will match my plant water demand, I know that I've got a bit of runoff in my irrigation, so maybe I'll do an extra one, or my crop factor is maybe not quite that one, so I'm going to pull it back a bit. But essentially, it comes down to you can't manage what you can't measure. All right, so do your best to try and incorporate all those factors. You're never going to have a perfect number, but at least it gives you a greater understanding about what's going on. So the next one I want to touch on is fitting in irrigation around the weather. Now, this is quite topical and pertinent because this has essentially been our rainfall for the last couple of months. It's been these large rainfall events spread out sporadically. So how do we? It's not over just the rainfall, but our wind as well. So we've had quite a windy season as well. So how do we fit it in with this weather? It can be a bit challenging, and waiting for that perfect time to irrigate often never comes. So essentially, do it whenever you can. It's got to be. I've got to simplify this a fair bit. Do it whenever you can. All right. Now, there's 2 reasons why you wouldn't do it. Okay, is it for convenience? Is it convenience or efficiency? Say, I'm not going to do it because it's windy. Well, if it just keeps blowing and blowing and you keep putting it off, you're going to have to do it sooner or later. Or is it for management? Now, if you're doing it because if I irrigate, I can't get machinery on, or if I'm doing it because I can't do the spray, or there's some other thing that you can't do because you irrigate, not a problem. Then the importance of irrigation falls down the list. But really work out whether it's for convenience or management. If it's convenience, you may have to put up with the inconvenience of getting the water on. Because yes, it does fall down the list of importance, but the little bit you might lose because it's a windy day and it's not the great day for irrigating, you'll lose a little bit you lose for evaporation. It will be negligible if you fall behind either in your crop water balance, or you fall behind to the point where you dry your soil out so much that you lose your infiltration rate. Your infiltration rate falls, so you can't actually catch up. So sometimes it's a matter of, and especially when we've had these rainfall events, you're not necessarily irrigating for crop water demand. What you're doing is irrigating to maintain good soil conditions to get irrigation on when you most need it. So things you can do are back-to-back irrigations. All right. If you need to try and catch up, if you need to get it on and you've only got a small window, don't be scared to go back-to-back. Not only do you get it in while you can, but you get greater efficiency in infiltration if you're especially on the follow-up irrigation. The first one breaks down any hydrophobicity or any crusting or anything that you have there, and the second one you'll find that you will have a greater infiltration. So back-to-back irrigations is something that you can do not only to actually fit it in, but also as a good tactic. And the other one is irrigate while it's raining. Okay, it seems counterintuitive, but again, same as back-to-back irrigation, it helps with infiltration. You're not spraying while it's raining. There's other things you're not going to be doing while it's raining. Go turn the irrigator on. Right? That can be really helpful. So in terms of how do we fit in, it comes down to we just try and fit it in where we can. But these are hopefully a couple of things we can look at to try and help fit it in. The other thing I just wanted to fit in here around this season that we've been having so far is around the temperature. Now, we know it's been quite a cool spring. I've been complaining as much as anyone about how windy it is and about how cool it is and waiting for those temperatures to get. So this is a graph that I've pulled up from the demonstration site at Joseph Cromie's vineyard, and this is our growing day degrees from October, which we've set for grapes. But what it really does show is, and this is pretty similar across the state. So I'll pick this one graph out, but this trend is very similar across the state. So it has pretty big implications for vineyards, but also across the board in terms of going, well, this is what our season's like because of our temperature and how things are going But also I wanted then to compare that to our evapotranspiration. So what we've done is this is an accumulation of growing day degrees, but we'll also put on the graph evapotranspiration. So we can see here last year that evapotranspiration and temperature, they kind of met there. And the discrepancy we've seen between this year and last year, so this blue graph is this year's growing day degrees, this yellow graph's last year's growing day degrees. This blue line here is this year's evapotranspiration, and that yellow one's last year's evapotranspiration. So a bit of a comparison between the 2 years. So we can see the divergence of this year and last year of our growing day degrees. Whereas in terms of evapotranspiration, it's lower, yes, because we've had cooler temperatures, but our divergence from each other isn't as great because with the lower temperatures, we've also had higher winds. So we might be going, we don't need to irrigate as much because it's cooler, but we've had a lot of wind that's actually utilized, that's taken a lot of that moisture away as well. So yeah, using temperature as that proxy for ETO can be a bit misleading, but this is just giving you a guide where we're sitting this season so far. So November in particular, and December is ones where that divergence has been quite stark. So the next topic I want to go on to is ground prep in a wet spring. Now, this is one that I'll want to focus on because it's something that we're seeing in a lot of our data, and a lot of especially people that have moisture probes that I've spoken to for a number of years, they're having issues this year that haven't been so pronounced in previous years. So ground prep in a wet spring. Now, with the rainfall graph that we saw, we've seen that we've had those large rainfall events that have fallen through. Now, what happens is those rainfalls, they're going on paddocks that are fallow. So we've got nothing to draw that moisture up. On a pasture, that's being utilised. A lot of that rainfall has been fantastic for our pastures because it's been utilised by a plant. Whereas the ground that we're going to work, it's fallow. So it's just sitting there, not really making things fantastic to work. So we have limited time between those rainfall events, okay? So working wet soils, and most of us know this can lead to more cloddiness, compaction, and smearing as well, okay? So sometimes we need to, change our strategies in terms of how we work up our soil to form our molds or form our beds, whatever it may be, or get a decent soil conditions to actually get our seed into. But what happens is that there's these impacts, clodding, compaction, smearing, can have flow-on effects that last all season in terms of irrigation efficiency and water movement. So I'm going to go through just a few photos that we've taken so far this year as examples. So this one's here is a soil through the Midlands. So this is our typical duplex soils with our sandy loams. And we can see here that this capping or this crusting that we've got over our loams through here, okay? So you can see they dry out very quickly. They're windy weather, they're exposed, they dry out very quickly, and then we get a lot of preferential flow coming off the top of those molds into here. Now, particularly in potatoes, we want to make sure we have good moisture in the mold. That is critical for good tuber initiation, critical for good emergence and uniform emergence, but also critical for tuber initiation. This is one thing we want to make sure that we get on top of. This is a video that I took, might have been 4 years ago, but it's kind of one that just highlights, like I said earlier, take your pivot for a walk, turn it on, have a look what's going. These kind of things. This can be the first clue to we might not be matching what our plant water requirement is. So this is one there. Now, granted, that water's going down the spray track, it's going down spray runs, but that's the canary in the coal mine to telling you, well, do I need to do a bit of digging and having a look at what's going on? Because this is a picture from this year and how much washout we can get if the irrigation we're putting on isn't actually going in. So when I go back to that formula we talked about in terms of that water use efficiency. Now, if we go on, switch on our irrigator, we're putting on 12 mils, and that's our part. That's going into our calculation in our mind, but actually it's running off our paddock. Number one, our calculations way out. Number two, if you don't take our pivot for walk, these are the kind of this is the kind of damage that can be happening as well. Now, what happens is you might have a moisture problem. You might have you'll be digging holes and having a look going, oh, I've irrigated, but it's still dry. So what's your solution? To irrigate more. Well, to irrigate more is not going to solve that problem, but it's going to exacerbate problems like this. So really important to do that ground truthing. I love that technology. I love using moisture probes, but ground truthing with what you're seeing is so important. So if you look at a graph that associates, this is a graph from a previous season. So if you look at a moisture graph that associates with what we're seeing there, we can see here we're irrigating this time of the year and we're seeing no infiltration whatsoever. Now this is fairly early on in the cycle of that potato, and we can see here then we're getting moisture uptake at depth, which we shouldn't be. This should be happening through here. This is way too early for having that happen. But also what we're seeing here later on, now it's not something that necessarily lasts all season. So when your molds are exposed to sun, to wind, they're most vulnerable when it comes to capping and poor infiltration. So that's our key period where we want to make sure we're maintaining soil moisture to maintain infiltration. So little and often is a good way of going there. Double irrigations, irrigating during rain, things like that. So, but what we can see here, we had no infiltration there, but what we start to get infiltration in the mold later on. Now, what this coincides with is row closure. So when the mold's exposed, and you haven't got much hope if you've got poor soil structure. But once you've got canopy closure, your microclimate within the soil on top of the soil changes. Your humidity increases, so it doesn't dry out as quickly. But also what happens is the water falls onto the plant and it gets directed down the stems. It runs down the stems and it gets concentrated on the mound. So in a lot of times, it's just that early period that we want to make sure that we're getting irrigation right. Don't leave that period too late after any rainfall we get. Utilize that rainfall to help get that in and maintain good soil moisture. And so I can also highlight that here. So this is where we've put a probe in the mound and the furrow. So the red line's the mound and the blue line's the furrow. So you can see here early irrigation that in the furrow. We can see, of course, that's where the water is going to always concentrate, is in the furrow. It's going to flow down into the lowest part of the profile. So we get greater infiltration in the furrow. Little less got infiltration in the mound. That's fantastic. That's good to see. We're having impact there. Great. We've got a large rainfall event here that's filled everything up. Then we've let our mound dry up too much, and every irrigation we get after that really has a poor impact in terms of infiltration. We're still getting infiltration into the furrow, but not into the mound. And it's not until we get a rainfall event here that we actually start to catch up and get infiltration back into the mound. And then once we get canopy closure, we can see here that things start to become a lot easier in terms of we still dry out, but because the humidity and the funneling of the water onto the mound is happening because of the row closure, we can see that we're pretty much out of that danger zone. So, but there's that period there that we've got to make sure that we try and capture. So if we look at in terms of where our yield potential is being lost, it's that gap between the blue line and the red line. All right, we want to try and minimize those gaps as much as we can. So we looked at that crusting. So where soil has broken right down into its finest aggregates and filled up the macropores and micropores. That's one way of how infiltration gets reduced, particularly in potato molds. This is one where wet conditions can get worked up and into a clod. And this is an example there. So if you do a bit of a close-up, we can see here digging down and having a look. And we can see that in terms of trying to capture soil moisture, we're fighting a losing battle. So in terms of thinking in your mind about how water's going to move for that profile, it finds the path of least resistance. Now, the path of least resistance is within those cracks, in between those clods, and away it goes. So if we look at a probe that is in this exact paddock, we can see here, we've had irrigation. So this is a stacked graph and this is a sum graph. We can see here, we've had irrigations, and they've done nothing. All right. They've completely bypassed the probe. They've bypassed everything. They've gone through those clods and we're not getting anything in terms of anything sitting in that soil matrix, of the mold. And so when you feel any questions about what that fluctuation, there's temperature. We've got the probe, gets affected by temperature, but that gets leveled out as soon if there's more moisture in the profile. There's so little moisture there in terms that it's just being affected by temperature, that up and down there. So that's daytime, nighttime temperature. But what we want to see here is we're getting no uptake in terms of where the water's going in the profile. Now, there's a paddock which is similar on the same farm, but not as bad. And this is that graph here. So I went in a little bit afterwards. So we can see here, same thing, where nothing's really happening, but then we've got this rainfall here, this irrigation, limited rainfall, and we can see it didn't do much, but then as we're subsequent ones, they're having an impact and they're getting, but the big key here is we can see how it's the irrigation, the first part of infiltration that happened was at the 30 centimeters, then the 20, and once that 20 started to fill up a bit, and then the 10 will start to come online a bit, but it's happened below that 10 centimeters. So I tried to get ChatGPT to draw me a picture, but it had a bit of a hissy fit to try and explain what we're looking at here. So if we look at imagine those clods from side on, the water's going down, bypassing those clods that through the preferential pathways, and the water then sits here. So that first irrigation went down through and came into here. That second irrigation went down through, came into here. That third, this one here came down and it started to come to, that 20 centimeters. And what's happened is it's wet up and then it's got to that, it's filled up to the point where you start to get slow infiltration into those clods. And so they start to capture moisture, but it's only filling from that bottom up. Now, yes, we're getting moisture in the mold, but this is dangerous when it comes to having a wet profile. Those cloddiness causes to a wet profile because essentially that top 10, 20 centimeters for a while isn't actually holding moisture. So we're creating free moisture rather than plant available moisture. So this just kind of shows how, yes, it can improve itself, but we're still in a bit of a risk there. And it's not just sandy loams or clay loams in the Midlands. It can happen in red ferrous soils too. So this here is a paddock up at the up on the northwest around the Penguin region. And we can see here, so this is the soil in the mold, and we can see that aggregation, that formation there, and we probe there. We can see that we're getting that poor infiltration there, and then this here is in the furrow. So the furrow can be a really important source of moisture, particularly later on in plant growth, and this is pretty much using your feet how far you could dig without too much resistance. So there's a lot of compaction. So in the mold, we have aggregation and clumping and clodding of the soil, and in the furrow, we have compaction. So we can't even then rely on that furrow to collect the water that runs off the profile. So if you have a look at that in the graph, and this is the graph that's there in that paddock, we can see here we had a 20 odd mil rain irrigation event. And this is a hard hose, so it's putting it on quite far. So it's got a high instantaneous application rate. Really didn't have the impact we were expecting. Okay, so this was happening when the plant was at emergence. But we can see here an irrigation went on just this morning, around that 40 mils. So quite a heavy rain irrigation event. But now that we've got row closure, we can see that we've got out of this. We got out of this danger zone, this danger period, and now we're going back into what we're looking at, because what we're hoping to achieve, because the humidity and that microclimate has occurred, so that dry soil isn't impacting it so much. So we look at this and go, okay, we've avoided it here, but this is one to be careful of. So the big question is, okay, if you have a moisture probe, fantastic. You can hopefully use that probe, not for irrigation scheduling at this point, but to highlight or identify any issues that may be happening, particularly now where you really want to try and get good mild moisture for tuber initiation and establishment. And so if you don't have a probe, what's the next option? Well, where to dig to have a look. And this is conversations I have with clients over the phone quite often, where I'm sitting there looking at the graph, or they're in the paddock having a bit of a dig. And these are the things we if we have poor infiltration, where do we dig to actually get a picture of what's going on and seeing if this is actually what's occurring. So first things first, put a moisture probe in. Of course, that'd be the way to go. But if we don't, and we have a paddock which is got beautiful uniform soil moisture, we want to be digging within the mold, particularly early on. Like I said, we want to make sure we get good tuber initiation, and that's where we want to bulk our irrigation to go. But also to look to dig within the furrow. Okay, our furrow soil moisture, while early on it might not be as effective, it is effective there in terms of available later on, and it's a good indication if you want to irrigate to the dry. All right, so irrigate to the dry, but then use this to the wet, because then that's water that you're potentially losing to runoff or potentially losing to deep drainage, especially on your free draining soils such as your ferrous soil. So where everything's going well, your soil's behaving, that's where we want to dig. If we've got profiles where it's running off the edge there, and we're only getting a little bit of infiltration, but most of it's happening there, where you really want to dig is in this spot here. Okay, we want to dig down here 20 on the at the corner, like I guess the corner, if you can call the edge of a curve a corner, down here. So this is where your roots have got your sets down here. Your roots are going to be in here, bulky roots. That's the first place they're going to be drawing moisture up from. So if we can dig down here, this is going to be the driest point we have. Now, if we've got irrigation that's not going into that profile, we can soon pick that up. We don't want to be digging here because that's not necessarily indicative of what's happening down here, and we don't want necessarily to be digging here to give us an indication of how dry it is, because what happens is if we dig here, we say, oh, it's wet, but in terms of do we have that moisture availability for that really critical stage of tuber initiation? So we dig here first. That's our first point to dig in that the base of the mold and diagonally under the plant, not down, but diagonally under. Then we look to dig here. And this is an indication. If it's really wet there and really dry there, that's telling us that we're getting a lot of runoff off the surface, and we might need to then go to a bit of an irrigation strategy, which is double irrigations or little and often, or irrigating during a range to try and improve infiltration there. But if we are having issues, that's where I kind of go, we dig here too, there, and we just dig everywhere. Just as much as I say, dig more holes, dig deeper holes, as much as you can. The better the profile you can get, it will not only serve you for this season, it will serve you for next season as well. You're going in with a great understanding about your paddock. So if we look at that data in terms of how a potato plant uses moisture up in the mold and in the furrow, this is some data that we've had in a red ferrous soil. We can see here soil moisture in the blues in the mold, and we can see here that this is so total soil moisture. Most of our moisture is being taken up, is being utilised within the mould. And there we're talking about that, that top 20 centimetres. This is the soil that's behaving itself, lovely infiltration, everything's looking great. Okay, so as an overall, that's the behaviour, that's the way we want to behave. But if you look at the 30 centimetres of the mould and 10 centimetres, the top 10 centimetres of the furrow, so they're kind of on the same level, we can see here we're getting greater infiltration in the furrow as we would expect, but we can see here, especially early on, we're getting a lot of utilisation of moisture. So in that mid period, we're getting a lot of utilisation in the furrow later on in the season. So your roots are going down and using that furrow moisture. So it's not wasted moisture. Yes, we concentrate on the mold, but it's not wasted moisture. And as we can see, as we're getting deeper, those roots are proliferating into the soil. So 40 centimetres below the surface of the mould and 20 centimetres below the surface of the furrow, they're pretty much even. So we know that we've got a really good root architecture lower down. So that water's still being utilised. And, so understanding where that water's moving is important as well, and just appreciating that. And we've got a lot of other mound furrow graphs that replicate this. And the last one I want to touch on when it comes to poor infiltration into a mould is hydrophobicity. So this one here, and I've used this picture plenty of times. This is one that I've drawn on a few times in a video. But we can see here, this is a classic case of hydrophobicity. So we can see here that the water beating, the way it's beating and pooling and ponding, we can see gaps in it. It's really coagulated together. Okay, so as soon as we see that, if we think back to that formula I spoke about earlier in terms of evaporation is one of our water losses. If this happens, suddenly your evaporation spikes because this is sitting here, pooling on your water, ponding on top of your surface. It's not going in, and if it does, it's going in very slowly. But it's most likely going to be lost to evaporation before it actually gets into the profile. And this is an indication here. Seeing how, yes, we've got some in the furrow, but, and I've scraped that back, 5/6 of the bugger all really in terms of what we're exposing. And so we can also see here poor seed set as well. So poor establishment and it is quite patchy in terms of establishment. So if we see this is a really a red flag when it comes to that hydrophobicity. So that's about all I want to touch on when it came to the irrigation component. But we'll just go through we'll touch on the summary later on when we finish. But now I want to go into our bit of a seasonal update. So we'll start with the northwest. If we look at the circular head, this is a month ago. We can start to see we are starting to draw moisture down that top 30 centimetres. Things are starting to kick off. Edith Creek, and same thing. We were sitting fairly wet, but now we're actually at the same period as where we were last year in terms of soil moisture. But the big difference between this year and last year is that this December rain fell when, particularly in southern parts of the places a bit further south, that fell a bit too late. We were quite dry coming into this, it fell too late. But the big difference between this year and last year is this period here. So this here is yield potential in pasture growth that we have had now. It's being utilised by the pasture. We can see that diurnal stepping here and here. So it's being utilised. So this is increased growth this year that on top of what we had last year. So we're in a better position. So this is where it's important to understand not just did we hit winter refill, when did we hit it, how long did we hit it, our pattern. Okay, so the pattern is really important. Did we have that Goldilocks winter where it didn't get too wet? But then also, yes, we might be at the same point, but as what's happened in between. So that's one that I want to focus on. So this kind of gap here between this year and last year is what's driving really improved pasture growth this year. If we look at yellow, going a bit further down, again, we see that gap there. That's the main difference between this year and last year. We're at similar soil moisture, but that gap in between November is what's driving greater pasture growth. Through sassafras and that Westville area, this is one that's quite interesting. We got that December rain. So that December rain that came through last year that was horrible for poppies and peas. That's shown there in that yellow line. Sassafras and that Moriarty area, we're kind of a bit lower compared to last year where it's been a bit of a rain shadow. So yes, it's wet at the moment, especially for spuds and peas and trying to work out your ground. But in terms of your pastures that have been utilising moisture up through October and November, you're a little bit dry where you were same time last year. So if you have a bit of a dig around in your perennial pastures and have a look how they're behaving if you dry down to 30 centimetres, just to give you a bit of a handle of where you're at. So a summary for the northwest coast, similar soil moisture, but we've got a 4 to 6 week long window. Okay, and that's because with our rainfall's fallen in a more prolonged pattern as opposed to a big dump in December. So circular heads coming out of a wet winter and spring. But on your light, sandier soils, don't leave it too long before you're irrigating, especially those that can go hydrophobic, because if you let it dry out, you're playing catch up. Okay, so yes, look at your wet areas, especially hump and hollow. Keep an eye on that, but don't irrigate to the wet bits. Make sure you're irrigating to the top of your mid slope or your top of your hump. There's a lot of late planting going on. Soil structures are maybe less than ideal. So yes, I know it's really hard to try and get ground prep, when you've got wet soil, but if you do need to do it, please keep an eye on your soil structure. So cloddiness, if you've created clods and you've had to break them down, you're not out of the woods. It might look nice, but what you've just done is you've broken down the aggregates into their smallest form. So instead of having reduced infiltration because of clods, what you have is reduced infiltration due to crusting. So there's no free lunch. You're just going from one limitation to another. So particularly before you get ground closure, just be really critical of that. Be really careful of that, and if you need to, just do some little and often irrigations back to back, things like that. Okay, but make sure you do that so you don't fall behind your irrigation, because when things warm up, and remember it's still be pretty windy when things warm up, they'll take off. So I've looked at the northeast, around the Pipers Brook area. We can see here again, similar to that northwest. We're at a similar moisture period, but again, we've got this gap here between this year and last year, where we've got that more soil moisture that's going to prolong it should prolong our summer. So we can see here we've actually had 3 real distinct seasons over the last 3 seasons, which again, as I say quite often, good record keeping will help you in terms of how you look when you look at the information. Whatever happens next year, we've got 3 distinct seasons or patterns that we've got so far. If you've got good record keeping, you can go next year, the way we're tracking, you can go, well, how am I looking? What are the things that I did that went well? What didn't go well? Really important there. So again, that gap's there, something we want to take that's helped driving our pasture growth. Re-rumour, same thing. Okay, so similar thing there. In terms of that seasonal moisture. If we go further up to that, the Waterhouse, Tomahawk region on those lighter, sandier soils, we're a bit drier where we were last year, but growth is still pretty good up that way. And same thing as I go a bit further northeast in the branches, we're seeing similar there in terms of we haven't had that rain that has come through that Scottsdale region, but things are actually still kicking along pretty well. So Scottsdale Pipers River, similar soil to soil moisture last year, but we've got a greater window of sort of pasture growth. Look to start irrigating your pastures. Don't slacken off, because don't forget our season did start early. We did have growth in August, so we did start early. Let's make sure we keep onto our irrigation if we've got irrigated pastures, so we don't bring on vegetative growth, pre-productive growth too early. So the northeast, we're behind on last year on soil moisture, but the timing of rainfall has been better compared to last year. It's been spaced out rather than one big dump, which just keeps ticking along. But if you're irrigating again, try and prolong that. Really important on those lighter soil types, because they'll dry off really quickly. So the northern Midlands, this is where things start to change a bit. So if we look at Parkham, again, we've got similar point, but we've got that difference there in terms of available moisture compared to last year. Hagley, similar story through there. Meander, we're starting to draw moisture off, so we've been pretty wet, and last year those December rainfalls just kept things wet. Things are starting to kick off now, so compare your paddocks and how they were same time last year. Bishopsburn, again, the gap there, our rainfall's kind of fallen off. So these are things where, especially your pasture seeds, clovers, things like that, they're really kicking along now. This is a really good indication that we're saying unirrigated. We're starting to draw moisture down at 80-90 centimeters. So let's make sure we keep on top of that irrigation wise. And then if we go to Elsdon on the other side of Longford, we can see there we've got that. We're starting to follow that similar trend. So Northern Midlands, we've got that month and a half buffer compared to last year. There's still maybe wet patches about, but we're not wet. Okay, so don't let those wet areas fool you. As I mentioned, anything that's gone in, or anything that's sown autumn or winter, they're using moisture fairly quickly. Last month webinar was 30 centimeters. This month it's about that 60 centimeters. So irrigate for the rain that's fallen, not what's forecast. If you see 12, 15 mils forecast, don't stop irrigating. If that comes, then you can think about irrigating. But then I'm going to say ignore any rainfall under 12 millimeters. Okay, that can be a real. Just if you ignore it, things should track fairly well. If you take that into account, like I said, we overestimate our rainfall. So try and anything less than that 10, 12 mil, just keep on irrigating. Don't stop. But again, don't stop for the rainfall that's predicted. Stop for the rainfall that's fallen once you know where it's gone. So Southern Midlands, Lewisham, so Campbelltown area, we can see things are tracking similar to where they were last year, but we've got better growth there from that rainfall that we got through October, November. If we go a bit further south, things tracking pretty similar to last year, and we haven't had that buffer that we had in the past. Same with that stone house. They had a couple of East Coast influence and rainfall patterns, but nothing too much. If we go to the Coal Valley, we can see here very similar. We've been pretty dry this year, and it has just continued on. Through the Derwent Valley, same thing. It's tracking fairly similar. Yes, we had a bit of rainfall, a bit of reprieve there, but it's only our top 30 odd centimeters. We've still got no subsoil moisture. So my last comment on the last one was I said we've got no subsoil moisture. So these graphs are fairly similar. If we go across to ooze, they got some rainfall that had a greater impact. So there's growth. But don't let that fool you in terms of what's there available subsoil moisture. In Hamilton, we've had a few anomalies in terms of rainfall that things are looking pretty good. But this was my summary for last month for the Southern Midlands Derwent Valley. And I'm going to just change it slightly. So we've gone from catching up same time last year. Well, that's soil moisture the same time as last year. So knowing how your soil behaves top down and bottom up is important. I was saying last time, pasture growth will be exhausted very quickly. Fodder conservation, it's gone. It's been exhausted. There's no room for that, okay? No room for fodder conservation. But in terms of the irrigate, especially all the spuds are going in now down there and all the cropping's going in, understanding your soils, if they fill from the bottom up, and try and understand that because your irrigation might not be going to where it's needed. So that's really important to try and quantify or clarify at least, and just do not fall behind. We have no subsoil moisture to draw upon or fall back upon when it comes to this part of Tassie. All right, so make sure you do your irrigations and don't let yourself fall behind. It is important to irrigate to evapotranspiration plus some, right, as a precaution. East Coast and Fingal Valley, things are pretty much tracking how they were last year, except for those we're sitting a little bit above, so we're getting a bit of that excess moisture there, but still it's not ideal through those parts. So I'm skipping through. I've gone over time. I think the first time in 3 webinars, not doing too bad. So if we look at the East Coast, we're behind last year compared to the months, but we had a better spring growth. This is one where it's going to be interesting in terms of, yes, we've had those rainfall events that kind of prolong things, but it will the summer will finish rapidly. So just keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on your pastures and when they're browning off. All right, so that's one to look for. And just similar story to the southern Midlands and that Bothwell area. If you're irrigating pastures, just match ETO plus more. Okay, give yourself more there. So if we go across to Flinders Island, where that December rain that we had last year, we're sitting pretty similar compared to that to last year. And same thing so that's on those sandy soils down south of the island, but on those heavy soils, those rainfalls have been captured and they've been utilised. So it's in a much better condition on Flinders through there. But things will start to kick off once our day length increases. On King Island, things are looking really good in terms of that feed wedge there that we didn't have same time last year. So that's on that one there is on your semi-coastal country, on your lighter soil type. And then if we go to our heavy soil types, Pagaro clay, we can see here we're pretty much same time where we were, but that period here of improved growth and now is kicking along pasture growth. But one thing about King that I really do want people to keep an eye on. So again, we're similar patterns last year. Recent rains, they should prolong the summer period, but please keep an eye on your pastures because our growth in August, it's not normal, particularly on King Island. It's not normal because it's usually wet. Now August growth, it's happened. It's good. Gives you a good feed wedge. But make sure that that's not impacting you on the back end. Yes, we've got moisture. What we might end up with is similar growth pattern to last year, but a poorer utilisation of stored subsoil moisture because it's not so much the plant can't take up all the moisture that they're available because it started early and might finish early and go reproductive. So that's one thing to keep an eye on, because then there's flow-on effects from that in terms of when we hit winter refill, how long we sit at winter refill, and when do we go back into a normal cycle of a spring and pasture growth. So this would be one which I'm really keen to keep an eye on to get a greater understanding about how a dry season can impact not just when the dry season, but the following dry periods. And this is also one which I want to touch on before we finish is, and this is why I love these dryland moisture probes. They're giving us greater insight to not just how a dry season affects you within season, but the long-term effects that flow down the line. So the big one is impacts on pasture during the dry season. Now, the things that come from it are, we got reduced pasture growth. So there's overgrazing, there's less pasture persistence because they go into a stress phase a lot earlier and a lot sooner and a lot longer. And because of that, we get bare soil. Now, that's the impact during that dry season. But this is one that I'm starting to see a lot now. This period now, we should be seeing our pastures growing really well. Our pastures, if they are high performing pastures, they should be out. Cut for silage, cutting for silage or hay coming up soon. They should be at their peak. So I really want you to go out and have a look at your pastures. And I've seen some pastures that are looking pretty ratty, for lack of a better term. They're not looking fantastic. And when I've gone in and had a bit more of a dig, a bit more of a play, it's because you've got poorer performance during those dry periods. So you've got bare soil, you've got more, you've got weeds coming through, you've got increased dry patches, so you've got breakdown, you've got poor unit infiltration, and then the other thing is you get wet patches because it doesn't infiltrate in your dry parts, your barer parts, it goes down to your wet parts, so they sit waterlogged. There's all these kind of implications that happen because of the dry season we had 18 months ago. So go around and compare your paddocks, compare it to your other better performing paddocks, go and compare it to your neighbours, have a bit of a look, okay? So, and if you've got a paddock that's not doing as well as it should, have a chat to your agronomist, have a chat to your advisor around that, okay? Has your paddock taken a hit from last year? Is there anything you can do, remedial things you can do to improve your pasture from the flow and effects from the previous years? So this is kind of one that this is purely anecdotal and observational that I'm seeing around the place. But it's one where we can start to understand how seasons can interact. So key takeaways from today: irrigation conditions may not be ideal, but don't fall behind waiting. Get water on if you can. So back-to-back irrigations can be a really good idea, and also irrigating during a rain. Okay, so while you're doing nothing else, you're definitely not spraying. Trying to get irrigation on when you can is important, especially on anything that's gone in any autumn, any spring or winter sown crops. Really important to make sure you're on top of it. Wet paddock prep can impact soil structure. All right. Do you have clods? Did you have to break down the clods? All right. Things like that. If it's not, well, if you've worked up the soil and you look at it and go, this isn't how I'd like it to be, there's usually a reason for it. Now, if it's because you have to do more mechanical, to smash it a bit more or do something else, you're having an impact on soil structure. And that is going to have an impact in terms of infiltration, water use efficiency. So if you've had to do that, if it looks good and behaves like it normally has, fantastic. But if it hasn't, don't just think you fixed it by bashing it more. There's going to be impacts down the line. So make sure you dig and sample appropriately to make sure that you're picking up those issues, particularly on potatoes. And do a pasture assessment. Okay, do a pasture assessment. Go along, have a bit of a look. See what your weed burden's like. Have you got increased bare patches? Are your low-lying areas or wet patches, are they greater than they usually should be this time of year because you've got runoff of water? So speak to your agronomist, raise the question. If anything we can do from this workshop is hopefully equip you with the right questions to ask your agronomist, your advisor at the right time. All right, and if that's one of those, then hopefully we can improve your pasture, because there's no point in going into next year and seeing you just have the same issue, where you might have an opportunity to improve or renovate your pasture this season while conditions might be ideal. So that's it from me. AgLogic weather stations are one that I'm always going to spruik. This is the information this is where we get a lot of our information from. Also the farming forecaster sites. And also, if anything like moisture probes or any kind of ag tech, something which you are interested in, please give me a call. We can have a chat about it. Yeah, give you a bit more information about things you can use. So yeah, like I say, you can't manage what you can't measure. So any little indication that you get that you manage that helps you improve your decision making, yeah, can go a long way. So um, thank you very much for coming on board. And yeah, I'll have a great Christmas break. I hope you're not all too busy, and I hope the weather calms down so we're not flat out over Christmas and New Year. But yeah, thank you very much for jumping on. Cheers.